if you really look at it, you look at Earhart's conduct in making her world flight, which she never should have tried in the first place. She was way over her head to begin with. Her disappearance, her failure to find Howland Island, was almost entirely her own fault. It was hubris, negligence, laziness. She didn't learn absolutely essential skills that she needed to have and knew she needed to have them. She was trying to find Howland Island with a radio direction finder she had never been able to get to work. She had tried the day before on a test flight in New Guinea, couldn't get it to work, made excuses for it. And there wasn't anything wrong with the direction finder. It's just she didn't understand its frequency limitations. It couldn't take a bearing on a signal higher than 1,500 kilocycles. And she was telling the Coast Guard to send her signals on 7,500 kilocycles. Yeah, she could hear the signal okay, but she couldn't get a bearing on it because it was beyond the capabilities of her radio. So it's all on her that she disappeared. Yeah. The fact that she wasn't rescued is all on the Navy and Coast Guard. They really blew it and made some big mistakes, making assumptions. Oh, all those signals had to be bogus, even though they themselves had decided they were genuine. But it was more when they couldn't find her. It's just more convenient to say, well, we didn't do anything wrong, and she just crashed and sank. One of the most interesting things I found in writing the book is that, for many years, there's always been a thought that there was some kind of government cover-up, that the government really knew something. Well, that's right. There really was a government cover-up, but it wasn't the one people think there was. What happened was Earhart's conduct during her last flight was so egregious that the captain of the Coast Guard cutter Itasca, whose job it was to help guide her to Howland Island, he looks at this and says, we tried our best, and the woman was just so screwed up. And now the most famous woman aviator in the world has disappeared on my watch, and I'm not gonna take the blame for this. So he wrote up his after-action report and just totally trashed Earhart. And she did this, and she did this, and she wouldn't do this, and he was mostly right. And he gives that report to his boss. At that time, the Coast Guard was under the Department of Treasury. So his boss was the Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau. And Morgenthau looks at this report and says, oh, God, I had no idea. Well, Amelia Earhart's technical advisor, Paul Mantz, didn't buy the crash and sank theory either. He thought, no, they were hearing these radio calls. I bet she's on one of those islands. Maybe they're in the Phoenix group. Maybe even Gardner. He even mentioned Gardner Island. And so he said, I want to know more about what happened out there. So he knew that Amelia had a good, close relationship with the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. So Paul Mantz called Eleanor Roosevelt and explained, look, I'd really like to have these records so that I can look into it some more. So Eleanor had her secretary, whose name was Tommy, she was a female, her name was Tommy, to call Secretary Morgenthau and ask him to send Paul Mantz this report. And the call arrived at the Treasury Department at a time when Morgenthau was having a staff meeting about something totally unrelated. But all those staff meetings were recorded by a stenographer. There's notes for all of it. And when the phone rang, the stenographer kept going. So we have a complete account of Morgenthau's end of that conversation with Eleanor's secretary. And what he's saying is, oh, Tommy, we can't release that report. if we release that report, Amelia Earhart's reputation will be ruined. And you know how closely her name is associated with the Roosevelt administration, and the president's already taken all kinds of heat for the money spent on that failed search at the height of the Great Depression. And now you're going to put in something that says that they were looking for somebody that was just grossly incompetent. And we've got an election coming up. We can't do this. And Eleanor understood politics. She said, okay, well, send him something that'll make him happy. So what Morgenthau did is send him the radio logs, but not the captain's report. And Mance was okay with that. And that report, it was covered up. And that stayed covered up until the 1980s, by which time Earhart's book that was supposed to be called World Flight, but then ended up being called Last Flight, edited by her husband, George Putnam, that got published, and of course painted her as the great aviator that mysteriously disappeared. And then after the war, Putnam wrote his own book called Soaring Wings, a biography of his deceased wife, that again pumped her up. So by the 1980s, Earhart was already established as this outsized icon, aviation pioneer, which she never was. And consequently, we live with that today. And I will say that iconic image, false as it may be, has done tremendous good inspiring young people to,
absolutely.
It's kind of ironic. And there's no better legacy for her, because that's what she really wanted. She wanted to have an impact on young people, especially young women, to get into engineering and aviation and not just find a husband and become a housewife.
Yeah, and that's a great time to pivot a little bit to continue talking about her as both a person and an aviator. And I just was remembering that you said that she accepted a position to be doing teaching at Purdue part-time. And then even before she started, enrollment or applications went up, I think 50% for women, to Purdue immediately.
As soon as the word got out, Amelia Earhart's going to be here. Boom.
And she was constantly, she was coming in defense of other women. And she was a huge, obviously we talk about her legacy as a pioneering aviator and how important she was to the women's movement. But even at the time, she was already considered to be such a pioneer, both in the air and for women.
Well, and what's unfortunately been forgotten with all the focus on Amelia Earhart is that she was one of many really courageous and vocal women pilots, really good, better pilots than she was, that set records themselves, and also went to bat for other women, and but their accomplishments have largely been forgotten.